I've had a number of people ask me about pruning blackberries, and especially confused about when to prune Primocane blackberries. All these are going to be Primocane that I'm going to show you, at least at the first. I've got one that is a Floricane variety, but all these Primocane varieties are producing a summer crop, huge berries, but I have not yet pruned out the last year's canes, the canes that produced earlier this year. So let me show you what I'm talking about. The first part of this video is going to be about pruning Primocane varieties, how and why you prune out the dead canes on Primocane varieties. Later we'll talk about a Floricane variety. But before we do anything else, I want you to look at these berries. That berry is 2 inches long. It is huge. I want you to look at that. So this is this year's canes producing what they call a fall crop. I call it an ever-bearing crop throughout the summer and into the fall. So let me first show you a little bit of footage of what they look like when I planted them. When I planted them, they were 1 gallon pots and had, some of them had about 12 inches of a cane out of the pot. Some of them had 18, 24 inch canes sticking up out of the pot. Those would have been last year's canes. They grew last year. I got these in January, so these would have been last year's canes. Since they're last year's canes, they're all going to produce a few berries in the spring, and then they're going to die. The cane itself dies. It's gone. It's dead. That's what's happened to this cane right here. It is dead. Now it still has a few little weak berries on it, and I could keep them and pick them, but I've got such beautiful berries coming off now that I really don't need that. So what I'm going to come in here and do is just prune out this Primocane varieties Floricane. I know that's confusing. This is last year's cane. You can see how it's dying. After it produces fruit, it dies. Last year's cane. Now we're talking about a Primocane variety. When it produces fruit in the spring, it dies. So people are asking, you know, when do I prune out a green cane or something like that? No, you do not. Prune out one that is obviously dead. Obviously dead. I mean, that one's got a few weeks before it completely dies, but it's a dead cane basically. So let's move over and find some more, and I'll show you what I'm doing here and tell you why. That's a cane that was from last year. That is an old dead cane. Probably produced a few berries this year, but not many. Pretty small cane. Again, these were 1 gallon containers, and I don't see any more. Some of these have some bamboo stakes in them. When I got the plant, I staked them up so they wouldn't blow over, so they have a little bit better growth habit. So you'll see me pulling out some of the stakes along with the dead plant. So let's move over and we'll do some more. That right there is the cane from last year when I planted it. I'm going to snip it off as close to the bottom as I can do without hurting one of these new canes, these green, vigorously growing canes. Those are not the ones you want to prune out. It's these dead ones that were alive this spring, produced fruit, and have since died. Those are the ones that come out. I don't see everything else in there is this year's cane. I've got a little bit of damage here. I'm gonna prune off some of these leaves that have had some fungus damage. Prune out some of those. It's not a priority right now. I'm trying to show you how to do this other thing, but sometimes it helps me get a better shot anyway. Everything left in there is a green, vigorously growing cane. These are the canes that came up this year. These canes did not exist in January when I got the plants. These have come up this year. I don't see anything else in there that would be classified as a Floricane, as last year's cane. Everything here is what's called a Primocane, which means first year cane. Let's move over, do another one. All right, here's a good candidate. I've got it. This was a pretty good sized cane when I got it in January. I'm cutting the stake out. That was a little peach tree stake. But the cane itself was a pretty good sized cane, if I remember right, you know, a couple of feet tall. And I am going down to the bottom, pruning that out because it is dead or dying. That's the ones that come out. There's another one. I had 2 stakes on this one because it was such a big plant. It had more than one cane sticking up. Here's another one that's pretty obvious. This was actually the stake I put in it, and I tied it with that little machine. That was one of those orange bands that I tied around this cane. So that is a piece of actually it's a nectarine pruning that I pulled out of there, but I used that as a stake to hold the original little cane up upright. So it has since produced berries, and as you can see, it is dead and are dying. So I'll prune that out, and I'll look. Sometimes there's more than one cane. I'll look. I don't see any more. I'll prune out a few of these diseased leaves. I did spray with copper the other day. I showed you that. And that's hopefully going to cure my fungus problem. But everything left is a vigorous green or purplish cane. I think varieties, different varieties may have more purple in their canes. I don't really know about that, but that's taken out the old dead cane. Let's move over just a little bit. That right there is the stake. I'll cut the little string or the little band tape that I tied it with. I'm going to pull the stake out. I may have it tied down at the bottom too. I think it's just kind of intertwined with the roots. We'll pull that stake out. Again, that's not a blackberry. Oh, no. Anyway, that was the stake, and here is the dead cane. That is the cane from last year. I'm going to trim it out without cutting. Try to make sure I get it as low as possible without getting anything else. That is the cane that needs to come out. Dead, useless, worn out, done for cane. It's produced its berries and it's done. Now, what about these canes? They're producing berries. I've got berries on almost all these canes. Will they need to be pruned out when the berries die? No. This is a Primocane variety. So these first year canes will produce some berries. All right. So, but once they produce the berries, they won't die. The trick to taking out the right cane is take out the canes that are dead. If it's dead, take it out and get rid of it. Don't throw it right beside your plant. It could have some disease. Take it off and burn it if you can. Throw it in the trash, burn pile, whatever. Get it out, and I don't see anything else in here. Got some few diseased leaves. I'll trim those out. And see, this is a new cane. Let me pull that leaf off so you can see that. That's a brand new cane. Brand new cane right there. Even though these canes are 4 feet tall and have berries on them that are 2 inches long, I've still got new canes coming up. So what I have found about a Primocane, they call it a fall, produces a fall crop. In my experience, that is not necessarily true. It produces kind of an ever-bearing crop. As soon as the spring canes put their fruit out and die or start dying, the Primocanes will start producing fruit shortly after that. Again, this is the very close to the end of June. I have got huge huge berries, I'll show you in just a second, from my Primocanes. But these same canes, when they produce berries, they're not gonna die. Leave them alone, let them go. You need to prune them, but not prune them out. You know, prune the top, but don't prune the whole plant out, because it will remain all through the winter, and then next year it will produce a much, in my experience, a much larger crop as a spring crop than it did as a Primocane first year crop. I don't see these as a fall crop. I see them more as an everbearing crop. By that I mean this cane right here has already got a lot of berries on it, some really, really nice berries on it. But I've got another cane coming up right here, so that cane will probably produce berries in another month or two. So it's kind of, for me, it's shown to be more of an everbearing. The Primocane varieties that I've grown, and I've grown 4 different kinds, have shown to be instead of, they call it a fall crop, I've found it to be more of an everbearing crop. They start right after the spring crop of the second year canes die, and then or produce rather, and then they start these start growing immediately in the spring. But then the Primocanes, this year's canes, start producing berries right after that, and produce on through till I don't know about till frost, but throughout the summer anyway, until fall. But it's not necessarily you're going to get a big spring crop and then all of a sudden you're going to get a big fall crop. You're not. You're going to get an intermittent, in my experience with the varieties I've had, an intermittent crop of fall, summer and fall berries. This is Ouachita, and it has produced some really nice canes. It's not as vigorous as the Primark Freedoms that I just showed you, but it's produced some really nice canes. And the berries you see there are from the other plant. They're not from this plant. But these shoots will not do anything this year. They will not produce any berries this year. All the berries you see, and there's a few, are on the old, dead, and dying canes from last year. And these being a Floricane variety, they will not produce berries on this year's canes. This year's canes are called the Primocanes. Last year's canes are called the Floricanes. This variety, and most all varieties that are not Primocane varieties, produce on last year's canes, which are called the Floricanes. Second year cane is called a Floricane. First year cane is called a Primocane. And then there is a Primocane variety and a Floricane variety, so it's a little confusing. But these will need to be pruned out. I still got a few berries on them. I may keep them around, except I'm getting some really nice berries. Those look kind of anemic compared to the ones I do get. And but anyway, that's again a Primocane variety. Those blackberries right there are not from this plant. They're from the neighboring plant, which is a Primocane variety, which is putting out fruit right now. The Floricane variety will not produce fruit on these new Floricanes. Okay, so that hope I made a little sense. If your plant has produced berries and the leaves are dying, the stem is dying, the plant is dying, it's time to take that cane out, whether it be a Floricane or a Primocane. Either one, when it produces berries and dies, not just produces berries, because I've got some first year canes here that are producing some nice berries, but they're not going to die. Make sure it produces really nice berries. That berry is 1.5 inches long. When it produces berries and dies, that's when you prune it out. Prune out dead canes. Hope I made some kind of sense to you. And how to prune blackberries. How to prune out dead canes of blackberries. This is not necessarily a pruning video. I do have some of those. Look on my playlist below. I've got a playlist on blackberries, raising blackberries, and I show a lot of pruning videos, so that's where you want to find that. Anyway, hope that makes sense. Got some nice blackberries in containers, and they are just producing like crazy on the first year cane. But those will not die. Those will live all winter long, just like they sit right there. And then they will produce even more next spring. Then they will die. Then they will get pruned out. Hope that makes sense. All right, subscribe if you hadn't already. Ring the bell so you'll get notified about new videos. All right, we're gone.